Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we have a very special episode. Each of us has a voice inside that calls us to adventure, and each of us chooses to answer that call in different ways. Some of us find adventure in our backyard, while others choose the entire world as their playground. Today's guest is someone that wanted to feel the world and spent over 6.5 years walking across 4 continents, 14 countries, a handful of islands, and over 20,000 miles. Angela Maxwell is here with me today to share her journey of curiosity and exploration and how she walks the earth. Quoting her website, Angela, a novice adventurer when she began, faced the incredible odds of surviving the outback in Western Australia, dengue fever in Vietnam, a physical attack in Mongolia, and the sheer challenges of being a solo woman sleeping in a tent wherever she could lay her head for the night. In addition to going all in on adventure, Angela has shared her story all over the world as a speaker, including a powerful TEDx talk, and as an author in the book Wilder Journeys. This is a story that will move you, inspire you, and help you choose courage. Angela, welcome to the campfire.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you, Scott.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited to have this conversation. I've been just thinking about it and watching your videos and learning so much about you. You're an amazing human.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Angela, when we first spoke and I was starting to get to know you, one of the things that struck me was that you told me you don't do moderation and that you've learned to embrace being an extremist. So I wonder if we could start, you've taken this over 6.5 year journey walking the earth, and we're going to get into some of those details, but I'd love to just kind of go back to the beginning and help us understand how one comes to the place of making a decision to walk the earth.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I love that you start with the moderation piece because, now being a woman who's 42, I think I'm still just understanding what does it mean to embrace these parts of ourselves, and, struggled a lot when I was younger of we've got to moderate everything, everything we eat or, how we do things. And so ultimately, in what we'd say is the very beginning, the past life, just a couple of years ago, things were good. Like oftentimes we wait for a crisis. So it wasn't a crisis as much as this feeling of wanting something just a little bit more. And maybe that has to do with this extremist part of me, but it was like life was good. Business was good, relationship was good, but I just felt like I wanted a little extra sparkle, something there. What's there that I'm missing? And I heard about someone who was walking around the world. It turns out he wasn't actually walking, but it was enough to spark an idea. Now, I think we could talk about ideas and what that means. It might be a different conversation, like where do ideas come from? But I do think they're linked to a certain calling, right? Like how do we, one day we're just walking around the world and we get this idea. Someone said something, it sparked an inspiration. We watch something, we read something, and there's like an electricity that's created. We say like a light bulb moment, but something electric happens, and then it becomes all consuming. So to me, it's almost like that call. So I had the idea, walking around the world sounds like a great idea, a little wild, a little crazy. It sounds ridiculous for someone like me. But this became so consuming, I would say it was close to obsession. I had to find out who's done something like this, what women, how did they do it, what men have done it, how did they do it? I was researching, like I was getting paid to work in a lab and research and put all these pieces together. And then, yeah. And then I said, yes, let's do this. I might regret it if I don't.
Angela, I love this so much. And you just spoke to really just like the essence of what we love to talk about here on this podcast, which is that call to adventure. And I just heard you talk about it as a light bulb moment. I wonder if you remember that moment.
I do. It was almost like the seed it was the moment the seed was planted. Literally, I was in an art class. I heard about someone walking around the world who wasn't. It was actually Albert Spears, who in Spandau prison was walking the courtyard and was counting his steps as if he was walking around the world. But that's all it took. And I remember leaving that day from the class, walking through town in Oregon, where I was living, and everything became the world around me. Like the coffee shop became the Taj Mahal, and another building became like a Greek ruin. I mean, it was something that sparked so deeply that for the next couple of days I was full in. And then, as everyone else, what we tend to do is squash the idea for a little while. So then it's like, oh, that's crazy. I'll just let me forget about that.
Yeah.
And then over a couple of days and then weeks, it's almost like things keep coming in. I'm looking up something and I see about, Fiona Campbell, who walked across Africa, and it's like, oh, I can't get away from it. It's like, it's just there. And it might be that when we're looking for something, we see it more, but I am a little bit superstitious, and I like that aspect of the spirit speaking to us, that it was almost like keep staying on this path of that calling, without knowing what it looks like.
When you were feeling this wanting, right? I guess it's part of the call to adventure. When you're feeling that wanting, like, what were there any anticipations, or even, I hate to use the word expectations, but anything that you were kind of hoping for as part of that journey?
Well, it's interesting because as you say call to adventure, what comes up in my mind is a call to risk. I mean, meaning there's so much in our lives that we are experiencing as an adventure, right? Like a woman might say, oh, motherhood is such an adventure. Being married is such an adventure.
Yeah.
Travel is an adventure. But there was something about wanting to step out of the bounds of this kind of curated experience. And so I think there was an expectation in a way, or a longing, that it was kind of getting out into the world to feel it, not just see it. It wasn't like I needed to check off countries to go visit. I wanted to walk through these places, like connecting with the people, connecting with the land. And I liked having no idea what that could look like, but it had a lot of risk. And I think that because I identify as a bit of an extremist, I'm like, all in, let's go. I have no clue exactly where I'm going to go and what this is going to lead me to.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, before this call to adventure, what life was like for you, even like kind of growing up and sort of leading up to this point. Guess I'm wondering, like, was there a lack of risk taking that kind of pushed you over the edge to say, like, I'm ready to go take some risk? What was early life like for you?
It's interesting. I mean, the more that there wasn't a lot of travel in my life. As a kid and with my family, I had 2 military parents. But I did long for it as a child. I'm an introvert, but I'm also a bit of a hermit too. And I think I've always been that way. And so me as a child could just be satisfied with, books, National Geographic books or picture books of different parts of the world. And I think there was always a part of me that liked the idea of seeing and experiencing beyond the backyard. But I didn't focus my 20s. I say my 20s because I was just turned 32 when I started walking. So most of my 20s, it was still focused on really adulting well as much as possible.
Yep, sure.
Having my own practice, wanting to seem professional, and I've got my stuff together, just survive and be able to pay the bills, and and maybe if you're lucky, make six figures. It's almost like still didn't realize I was quite on this hamster wheel of
Yeah.
success, even though it was an entrepreneurial type of success. And so I think I didn't let myself explore the world in the ways that I wanted to for most of that. There was a little bit of risk taking. I think I've always been a risk taker, but never really with my life. So let me give you a quick example.
Yeah.
I fear open water. I have a thing. I don't know if I saw Jaws too early, which seems to be the case for many people. Thank you, Steven Spielberg. But it's this whole thing of not being able to see what's around you. So surely I spent most of my life avoiding lakes, oceans, things like that. And so I would never think of, oh, let's go jump in and face this fear and take that risk, So I did kind of stay within those boundaries of what's comfortable. And the walk was kind of that call and that invitation to start taking a bit more risk.
Yeah. I love it. And, for somebody starting this at 32, I mean, like you said, you had a good amount of time to do the adulting, right? And so it's not like you're going straight from, teenage life into this world. I mean, you almost had to, like, you kind of started to build up this professional side, and then you had to let go of that to go do this thing. Like, what was that like for you? Like the letting go of kind of, maybe I'm not going to say what we were, what Western culture and we're conditioned to do. You kind of just let go of that and moved into this adventure. What was that like?
Yeah, well, that was one of the most challenging parts because for a few reasons. One is because my work, which was generally coaching women, they had become like my friends. And so in a sense, I was not only letting go of these people I had worked with for a year, sometimes two, you have established these good, solid relationships and a rapport with, but it was also letting go of the money. The way that I wanted to do this walk was that I wasn't going to YouTube it. I wasn't going to broadcast it. And so I could only use what I had saved up. And that left me with about $5 a day on average. And so with no income, I had to really choose wisely, when I go spend something at the store to buy the noodles or the oatmeal or this or that. And so it was also just saying goodbye to a quote, a success that most of the world, and especially the Western world, sees is, you've made it. Now, why would you go and destroy all of that? You worked so hard through all, a decade to build this up, and then you literally are just going to let it go. It was kind of scary, but it was also pretty freeing. It was also like, I think there's a chance I could be happy living on a lot less. And so there's a little bit of an experiment in doing that too.
It's an experiment. I love it. Because I was actually thinking in my mind, I want to ask you that question. Why would you do that? And I just heard it's an experiment.
Yeah, it's an experiment. I mean, and I wanted to see if I could give back in some way. But what I found was a lot of it was the interchange, the experiences of the people I met along the way. How can I help you? Or if, you invite me in your home, can I chop wood for you? It was, I wanted to kind of create a little bit of an economy in that way. So what I did do was I opened people up if they wanted to donate something, hot shower, a meal, if you want to give $5 or $10. And then I still gave half of that away to a nonprofit that I felt like was doing good work. So it just felt at least my walk became something that, sure, if I could get, something made people feel good to give, I can also give back. Kind of trying to create something, some type of a flow, a tap open in a way.
Yeah. So people approach adventure differently. I think like some people, for example, like let's say I decide I'm going to climb a mountain, right? That's a very intentional, like goal-oriented type adventure where you're training for it. You know what the end destination is. You reach the peak of the mountain, you safely come back down, and then you've completed your journey, right? I'm curious for you though, because I kind of suspect this was not necessarily about just reaching a mountain peak and saying I did it. Was this to what extent was this sort of a goal versus just kind of a let's see what happens? I'm just kind of curious where your mindset was when you set out on this.
It's interesting because it was two things at once, in the sense that there was a goal of finishing, even though I said, look, as long as I'm leaving from my best friend's house in Oregon and I return on foot. What that looks like in between, I mean, I drew a whole line where I'm not missing a single country, and it takes me exactly 5 years, but the goal would be I'm going to finish, even if it takes 6 or 7 years. But I also wanted to dive completely into the unknown. Like I really wanted the people and the places to shape the walk. But I found that ultimately while walking, if I set my mind on finishing, which is the goal, let's say the finish is almost like you reach the mountain peak.
Right.
It terrified me. And oftentimes it was so far away. It would be like, God, I still have like 4 years of walking. So I had to actually let go of the goal. I knew how I wanted to finish on foot, but what that looked like, it was actually a process of letting go of some kind of a form, a structure that I put on it originally, that I think a lot of us do on adventures. Plans change, life happens, things shape differently, to really like let that go. Look, if we're on an adventure, which I'm giving air quotes to, because if we're on an adventure, isn't it truly to let the adventure take you on a journey, so that we're not so stuck in how many miles we walk or ride a day and how far we get to, that we really stop for the beautiful sunset. We stop and have tea with the Turkish couple outside their house. Whatever the case is, adventure is something different to everyone, for sure. And for me, it's definitely the in-between. It's the meat in the sandwich. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so like as we speak about like the goal and sort of what unfolded over the 6.5 years, for listeners, could you just kind of take us through like the physical journey? What did you cover? Kind of talk about, we talked about in the introduction, 6.5 years, 14 countries, 20,000 miles. Can you kind of take us through that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so basically I left pretty close to the Oregon coast. It was a little bit, it's high desert inland, but I walked to Portland, and then I flew myself to Australia, where because I wanted to do 4 continents, Australia was almost a last minute decision. I didn't do New Zealand. I did New Zealand much later, but I ended up doing Australia, which is interesting considering just how inexperienced I was. And I was diving into Western Australia where dehydration and sunstroke just abound, and limited water and things like that. So there goes the extremist. I decide to go into the most extreme conditions to get, walking under my belt. And so I walked from Perth, which is kind of lower West Coast Australia, up to Columbaroo, which is pretty parallel to Darwin. But I wanted to finish in an Aboriginal community. Then I went up to Vietnam. Again, plans change. I was ready to walk across Southeast Asia. You got so many expats and people who cycle through there. It seemed like a no-brainer. But within 10 days of being there, I got dengue fever. It was a real culture shock, going from the desert to a place where mopeds and cars and houses abound. It was quite challenging for me. And that's when I decided I'm just going to go where I want. It was the first time I really, quote, broke my line. The goal of how I thought I would do it, it was the first time it was stripped from me. I was laying there with dengue fever going, I don't want to be here in Vietnam. Why am I here? Because I said I would be here, because I put it on a map with a marker. What am I doing to myself? And that's when I decided to go up north. When I healed a little bit, I went up to Mongolia and I crossed Mongolia. Had some interesting experiences there, which we'll probably talk about, and continued west, Georgia, the country,
Yep.
Turkey, parts of Europe. And then I did parts of, I did northern Scotland down to England. I went and hopped over to New Zealand to walk. And then eventually I finished across the States. So my home run was going Washington, D.C. to back to my best friend's place in Bend, Oregon. Yeah, that took about 6.5 years.
Yeah. What was it like to finish in the US?
Yeah, I should know how to answer this every time now. Here's what I will say. I liked being home for the comfort of many things. I mean, it's so great to pop into a CVS and grab something you know and that you want. I mean, the access to products and things that we love. And I mean, just it amazes me. I mean, the 24-hour shops, I mean, it's just surreal. Um, but it was also the most challenging for me, not because it was familiar and I was home. I had the most challenges with being treated quite harshly with police and local people, treated quite like a
Mm,
homeless person. It was very interesting. I hadn't noticed before just how easy it is for us to put on blinders, right? And I think everyone experiences this to a certain degree. You're walking into a Walmart or you're leaving a parking lot and you see that homeless person and maybe they've got a sign out and we all just don't look. Even sometimes it's because we see it so much,
yeah.
but it's just like, oh gosh, don't look, don't look. And I noticed that quite happening quite often, more than I had noticed before in the States. Um, and I ran into some issues with police, and all of a sudden I remembered, oh, everyone has a fence and everyone is like, stay off my property. It was challenging to find camping. So it was a very surreal experience. And I had, by the way, I had my 73-year-old mother on a trike with a chihuahua for a good chunk of it. So that also probably
Yeah.
played an interesting part. Yeah.
That's so wild. I have a couple of follow-up thoughts on that. So you've taken 6.5 years to traverse the entire world and seen different countries and seen different places. And actually, one of the quick hits here is you said that you had some trouble with authorities in the United States and people not being accepting, and maybe that's probably surprising to people, although when you start to think about it, maybe not so much. What were some of the places where you felt most accepted around the world?
That's really great. Quite honestly, a lot of them were like Turkey and Muslim places in particular. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, uh, Turkey itself. I mean, that in its I thought was phenomenal, and especially the older generations,
Mm,
especially the older women would really they'd have no idea what I was up to, didn't speak any English, and they would just be throwing fruit on my cart and not let me pay them. Like, no, just take it, from their own yard, or like, put coffee in a little, tomato paste can for on the go and stuff. It was quite amazing. But I would say, most every place except for first world countries was where I felt the most accepted. So nothing wrong against,
right.
Europe and the US. In fact, it was quite welcoming being back home. And I helped raise money for a nonprofit for a girls shelter. But, just the feeling of being a woman on the road. Yeah, I'd say it was mostly the eastern parts of the world. Yeah.
Where did you, and I'm gonna like talk about like, so we're gonna get into this idea that you wanted to feel the world. And maybe
Mhm.
we should just go there now because that's kind of where I want to go. But I guess my question was going to be, what were the different feelings that your body had in different places? Where did you feel most comfortable? Where did you feel most uncomfortable? And I think we kind of touched on that a little bit, but I would love to get into that. And I guess I will go back and set the premise here. In your TED talk and in a lot of different speeches and talks that you've given, you've said that you weren't necessarily out to do a walk, you weren't necessarily looking for adventure, but that you wanted to feel the world. And so I'm curious if you could just, for us, like kind of share a little bit more about what that means to you, and then let's get into some of those feelings that you had.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so often that we say things like, I want to see the world. I want to, I want to see the Eiffel Tower before I die or something, right? Um, and with all the conveniences that are there in the world, we oftentimes don't get to experience the locality of the place, the culture of the place. So there's a part of feeling that I mean when I said I wanted to feel the world, and that's still relevant for me now, is that I wanted to feel the people, their way of living, the culture. I wanted to walk past places and smell a woman cooking in her own kitchen. But there's also the sensation of the land itself. Um, so for example, something that surprised me was that on my walk, I found that as I walked into familiar places, like let's say I'm walking into Portland, Oregon, or, walking through into Kansas City, or things that's like, oh, I know these things, or I have a friend here, or whatever, that I have more of, I tend to steel myself a bit when I reach cities and towns, and I can't feel as much of myself, as much of
Mhm.
like what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and I'm absorbing. There's that sensation. I'm in a place, I'm just absorbing all these things, and I want to protect myself. And as soon as I get out into a forest or into a desert, all of a sudden I can actually feel myself more fully through the land. There's
Mm.
that connection there, um, that is almost really ineffable for me. I mean, just recently walking through Uzbekistan, the sun setting, I'm camping for the night, and I'm just sitting out on this flat part of the Kaiselkum Desert, and I feel like I'm hearing a song, and I start beating the ground, and I'm singing, and I'm thinking, I wonder if there's this ancient rhythm. It's kind of like a song, a tune of women having gathered that I'm picking up on.
Mhm.
Who knows if that's the case, but it was pretty fun. It's like I want to feel that, whatever that is. It's a just a great experience that you couldn't have being back home, sitting in my backyard.
I love that. And, I guess what I'm hearing you say is that the natural peace was where you felt yourself and you were able to feel the most.
Yeah, yeah. That I could yeah, I could feel my own being the most when I am quiet in nature, which I think is why we all many people long for being in nature and
Mm.
kind of resting and rejuvenation. But there's the feeling of other people too. I want to feel the world. I want to feel um, the the family that has lived in this hut that their grandfather made by hand 100 years ago. I want to feel the struggles and the pain of certain areas I'm walking through because it's poverty like we've not seen. I also want to feel the success of being, in Italy, and you're walking past these mansions and what that feels like just feeling and almost in a sense learning to be a better listener as much as it is also being a part of it all through a vicarious experience.
Yeah. So Angela, your story, there could be a Netflix series with multiple episodes and multiple seasons, and there's so much that you've experienced. So there's only we're only scratching the surface here. Like for example, you talked about your time in Australia, and you wrote about that in Wilder Journeys, and it's incredible. It talked about, your ability to learn to trust your intuition in navigating. Highly recommend people get a copy of Wilder Journeys. Your portion of that book is fantastic. That's just one of the stories on this trip. There's so many more stories. I want to get into your experience in Mongolia as one of the stories that happened to you, but a very impactful piece, and just explore that a little bit. So for listeners, this is something that you talk about in your TEDx talk, so people can check out your TEDx talk to get some more. But would you mind sharing what happened in Mongolia?
Yeah. So, as you said, I gave a TEDx talk about it because what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about not just what happened in Mongolia, which was a physical attack. So it was me in my tent at night. I'd been walking for about 3 weeks or so, and a Mongolian nomad came into my tent for rape. Okay, so just being clear what had happened. Now, the thing is, I don't share the story because, oh my gosh, look, women, see, the world is dangerous. In fact, if anything, what I found was, I had just walked Australia, and I had just had that little bit of time in Vietnam. So ultimately, I was just a year into my walk. I was still an adventure baby. I still had the whole rest of the world, ahead and years to go. But when this happened, and it's every girl's nightmare, and you're a father, so I know it's your worst nightmare for your daughters. But here's the challenge, and the reason that I like to actually talk about these things. It happened in a tent in Mongolia, but it can happen in a parking lot. It can happen at a college party. It can happen anywhere. And it's not because I went walking around the world or that we take risks or go on adventures alone that it's putting us in danger. These things can happen anywhere. But it's how can we be prepared? So we don't want to be not aware of our situation and what could happen. I knew this could happen when I started walking. But also, one of the most important things is how can we move past it when horrible things happen in our life? And that's why I called this talk Courage is a Verb. So when I was attacked in my tent in the middle of the night, the nomad had left. And now I'm just there and it's dead silent. No crickets, no nothing. It's just like, what am I going to do? My worst nightmare just happened. So I pack all my stuff up. I go find a little, kind of looks like a little ravine, like just a little divot in the ground. And I just shove all my gear and myself, and I sit there, and I've got hours till the sun is going to rise. This is the most pivotal moment in my life, right? How can I make a choice about how I'm going to respond to this? And it was in that moment that I used other women's stories to encourage me to keep walking. Other women who had also said, hey, I was attacked, or hey, I had this horrible experience. I lost a leg. I was enslaved, whatever the case. They said, I went through this, and here's how I got through it. And that's when I'm so inspired to talk about it, because I do believe courage is a choice, and it's a muscle in a sense that we have to practice. And that's why I do think taking a risk is important in our lives to stretch us and help us grow.
It was really powerful in your TED Talk, kind of talking about those moments after when you started thinking about women that you'd met and their experiences, and you kind of, it seemed, at least from my perspective, that you felt yourself kind of transition from somebody that had heard their stories and listened to their stories to sort of becoming one of them, and then feeling almost an obligation and duty, sense of responsibility to press forward. I wonder if you could just talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I love the way that you say that. It was very much that, in the sense that a lot of these stories that were coming up in my head, sitting in that ravine, they were pretty just horrible stories, things that we never want ourselves or our daughters or our mothers or anyone to go through. But all of those stories were told in a way that they had found how to thrive. And before I started my walk, I always saw them as that aspect of being courageous, them choosing how to thrive and be happy after such horrendous experiences. I saw them as superhuman. I saw them as something other than me because, oh, I could never do that. I could never get through that. You just lived through something horrific and here you are. You must be Superwoman. And then it was like, no, we're all just ordinary people trying to choose an extraordinary reaction or action in the world. And so it was in that moment I realized, wait, if I could choose this, if I can get through this, and it's going to be terrifying, if I can keep walking, then I'm choosing to be courageous the way the women I've admired have chosen. That was a really big impetus to help me keep going.
Yeah. And so in the TED Talk, there was something that really jumped out at me. You said you chose courage as a verb and that you would keep walking. But then you said, I'll keep walking towards forgiveness, joy, humor, trust, and love. Really
I'm glad
powerful.
thanks for reminding me what I said.
And
Wow,
yeah, I
that's a
mean,
lot of good ones
I
in
heard
there.
it loud and clear. And I'm just curious. I mean, after experiencing such a horrific event, to pretty quickly make that choice to walk towards forgiveness, joy, humor, trust, and love. I'm curious if you could touch on actually each of those words, maybe just really quickly. What do those words in that moment, in that time, mean to you? How do you walk towards those things after such a horrific thing has taken place?
That's really great. Wow. Well, let me at least just touch on forgiveness because to me, that's the guiding light for the rest of them. And it can be a little bit of the most challenging thing for me to talk about, only in the sense that while the attack was happening in Mongolia, it was in the midst of the attack that I had actually chosen, this is happening. I can't physically get out of this. I'm going to forgive you and myself. I'm going to forgive right here and right now. And then after sitting in the ravine, I'm going to choose forgiveness because I know that right now, if I attach my emotion to this memory, I am going to forever have a wound that could take a lifetime to let go of. So I'm going to choose forgiveness. And there was a moment, and this might be a bit intense here, but there was a moment when it was happening that I looked my attacker in the eyes, and in my mind, I'm saying, I forgive you, and even I love you. Okay. And this was some of the tools I had from the work I did previously to try and bring in and say, look, I could choose forgiveness a year from now. After I've talked about this and I process with my friends and a therapist, I could choose forgiveness 10 years from now, or right this very moment as it's happening, can I choose forgiveness? But I'm going to have to choose it again tomorrow. I'm going to have to choose it again the next day. I'm going to choose it again the next day because it's not like anything's going to be done. It's going to be work. If I could forgive that person, if I'm sitting in that ravine and I forgave that man, and I forgive myself for any wrongdoings I thought I did, because as you know, a lot of people think, oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. Forgive. Now I can move into hope that I can get through this and keep walking. Then I can even find the joy because the sun's going to rise and it's going to be beautiful. Can I focus on that? And then as I keep going, can I trust myself to make the decisions to, for example, find the right camp spot that even though my mind wants to tell me, see, can you trust your intuition? Because that's where you camped and that's where something bad happened. No, I do trust myself. I trust in how I'm going about this. I trust in my ability to be more prepared. I trust in my ability to forgive tomorrow. I trust in my ability to keep finding the joy and the hope. And if I can get through all of that, and I choose those things every day, not to say I'm great at it all the time, it's a practice, that leads me to the ultimate space of love, unconditional love to myself and other people, especially as I continue my life, meeting people, whether I'm walking or driving or swimming.
You're amazing. Wow. Thank you so much for the vulnerable sharing. I know that people have already been inspired by your story, but just your sharing today is
Mm.
amazing. Angela, one of the words you used, forgiveness, joy, humor, trust, and love. Humor.
Well, don't you think that's something we choose too? Like, I
This.
think oh, sorry, that was me. Did you hear that?
It's okay. We'll just go right
Okay,
back
you
into
might
it.
have to cut back.
No, yeah, we're good.
I think I tapped the
Ryan will edit, no problem. So we'll go jump
go
back into
back. Yeah.
humor.
Okay. Yeah, humor, I think, is something that we choose. I mean, all of these things are things that we choose, but you can choose to find something funny or not, or to react to it or let yourself laugh. I mean, how many times are we all stressed? And then we're like, normally I would find that funny or that's my favorite movie, but I just can't. I'm just so stressed. I'm just so consumed, with something. Um, but humor brings me out every time. And I have to say, though, even to the point, Scott, that I think I'm one of those people that um, like give jokes at the worst times. Like I want to use humor to make everything better. And I'm like, oh, did you not find that funny? Sorry, bad timing. All right. I just thought humor would relieve the situation. But yeah, I think it's important to choose humor because it always makes us feel better. You can't laugh without a smile.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, just in this moment right now, we just went from a very heavy topic to both of us smiling. And
There
you
you
did
go.
that. You did that.
You sh- well, thank you. I'd like to say you were good. You led that one. You led us into that. That was good. But that's how life can be, even with some
Yeah.
of the most intense situations. Yeah.
Well, Angela, you've talked about being somebody that doesn't do moderation, somebody that goes all in, somebody that's an extremist. And you've talked about being forced to face down your greatest fears, and then one of them manifests and it comes into reality. It seems to me that you've taken a worst case scenario and used it for both growth and inspiration. I guess I just wonder if you could talk about that for a minute.
Well, I mean, I think that's almost like really good feedback of what you're seeing. I mean, of course, that would be my ultimate goal is the ability to take these situations that are quite horrendous and be able to use that in a way that I can, you know, grow because there's something around the ability to choose what we focus on. So in some way, I want to make sure to be clear, I'm not saying it's easy for us to choose an emotion. When we're sad or we're pissed off or whatever, like sometimes you just need to be in it. But I do believe there's a power in at least knowing we have another option and how can we get there. And so, for example, the stories, sitting in the ravine, having these women's stories, is something that helped me keep walking. However, it probably took quite a while before I could laugh again. And I actually will very briefly tell you, I do remember the moment that I was able to have a little giggle after the incident. And it was probably a good 2 weeks later. I'm walking along, and here comes another Mongolian nomad. He's a man, and I'm, at that point, just didn't know who was who, and I just kind of had to just put an arm's length with all of them, and was still like having a hard time trusting a male nomad there. And he comes up, and he's on a horse, and he's just riding alongside me, looking at me. And this was just oftentimes people who travel, I think a lot in the East, find there's a lot of people just interested that, like, what is that thing? What's this tent like? Oh, what are you cooking on? It is absolute, just sheer, like childish and exploratory curiosity that they have, And he's riding his horse, and I just think, oh God, just leave me alone already. I'm just still trying to get through the day. It's windy, and it's just like, God, I hope I really made the right decision. I can do this. I hope he's not going to do something weird. And I'm steeling myself prepared if I have to like fight, you know? And he runs on his horse a few feet in front of me, turns around and faces me before riding off. And he sticks his arm out like a muscle woman, pats it and points at me like, you got this, you tough girl. And he rides off into the sunset. And it was so cinematic that I just started laughing. And I was like, thank you to whoever, whatever spirit, I needed that. Thank you. And it made me laugh out loud. And that began that journey. Humor is going to help heal. Yeah.
I love that so much. So Angela, I mean, 6.5 years, you had all kinds of experiences. We spoke about one, obviously, that was hugely impactful. I want to ask you, in this walking towards joy, humor, trust, love, could you share maybe one or two experiences that really exemplify that? The joy, the love, the humor, the fun, the richness, the awe.
Oh, that's so good. Well, it's true that there are probably quite a few of those that I can think of. But I have to say, I think what comes up the most for me, just because my mother and I have been on our own kind of healing journey, is that my mom came to join me for the first time. And we did part of Scotland down through England. And she hadn't ridden a bike in 25, 30 years. She'd just turned 70. And she says to me, I'm going to come join you. It wasn't even a question. Now, I don't know how people feel about their relationship with their parents. We love them. We're happy that we're adults and we no longer live with them. And my mom and I get along and we have a lot of humor and stuff, but I usually say, you know, it's like that, 3-day mark before you start kind of bickering and things like that. But, and so I feel like I was not looking forward to having my mom on board. I thought, oh, I'm going to have to like take care of her. This is going to be so challenging. But, we were in England. At least my mom wouldn't be flustered with language issues or cultural differences. And yet what I found was my mom brought humor to the table. My mom was reaching out to people. She'd come up on her bike and say, honey, I just got us a place to sleep. Or, hey, we're going to go up to this pub. And I arrive because she's faster than I am on a bike. And she's now met the whole community that's playing cards, and she's playing cards with them, and they're inviting us over for dinner. And so it was interesting because through having my mother, which I felt like was one of the most challenging things I could possibly think about, someone to join me on the road, is my mom. And yet she was reaching out to the world through humor and curiosity and engagement. And I think it opened me up even more, because I think for a good period of time after the experience, I still had to focus on how do I not protect myself, yes, but also how do I have a plan? How do I have an emergency and an escape plan? And how do I do all these things that are serious, because you can't be stuck in the same situation. I got a plan now. And it opened me up. And then therefore, as I continued walking around the world on my own after she went home, that really helped to continue that process. And I think at that point, almost everywhere, it felt like there was some point of humor and joy. And it's finding the little things,
Yeah. So since you took those first steps, you made that decision to do this walk around the world, 6.5 years, so much has happened. And it's not just the walk itself, because now you've had the chance to tell your story. You've met some incredible people that you've aligned yourself with. You're doing even more things now. Like, you have gone all in and you continue to go all in. And I'm just curious, like, if you were to go back to when you first started, if you like knew back then how this would all unfold, like, did you have any idea what things would look like for you today back then?
Not at all. And I think I really thrive in that situation. I love not knowing. I think that's it's this part of how I enjoy living, that I think even if I know, like if someone said, I can show you what your life will look like in 5 years, I think I would feel sad. Like I'd be like, oh, I mean, it might be great, but now it's just 5 years of knowing whatever happens, it's not going to be as good, or it's only building up to this thing. I like not knowing, that really stepping into that unknown place. And I don't think I'd do anything different. I don't think I would have gone to a different country and walked it, or tried something different, or changed some way of doing it, even with the bad or the challenging situations, or any of the good ones. I would probably do it all over again, every bit of it the same way.
What are some things that have like come into your life or manifested for you that you just never could have anticipated, that are kind of in your world now?
Yeah. Well, first off would be new lifelong friends. One of them is a few of them are authors in Wilder Journeys, but one of them is Jennifer Brisk, and she wrote a story in Wilder Journeys about leaving the opera world, and nature was something that healed her around that. But I met her while walking through Italy, and there was a big storm coming through, and she was wanting someone to help build a garden in her little villa. We find each other online. Next thing I think I'm going to take a weekend break. And I was there for 2 months. And now I'm the godmother of her daughter. Like, it's just those kind of things. Meeting my friend Carl, who is also walking around the world. And now we've done a few expeditions together, and one in the future. And I think the other thing I didn't expect to is that this has become a lifestyle. I really kind of thought, look, I might walk for 5 or 6 years. I'll finish, and then I'll get back to adulting. I'll pick up my business. I'll kind of do what I know I'm good at. I didn't expect that this has become a lifestyle, living on less and planning these long walks and these adventures. I definitely, for some reason, didn't see that being a possibility.
Yeah. So I do want to touch real quick. You did try to go back for a little while.
I did try to go back. I finished the walk, and I was a little bit elated, only because I hadn't seen my best friend. She had a young son, so she wasn't able to just pop off to parts of the world and come meet me. And I finished, and again, I didn't film any of this. I wasn't interested. So I'm walking that last day, and I'm passing the coffee shop I remember planning the walk in, and surprised the business is still going. But I'm just walking past all these places. I stop in to get a beer at my favorite little brewery in town, and then I go to the little convenience shop near her house, and I pick up a pizza and a bottle of champagne, and I walk right up the hill and around the corner where she's come outside to meet me, and we quietly kiss, hug, and then have a nice relaxed night like we hadn't been separated for 6.5 years. But I tried my best for a good almost 2 years. I was working in an office, which was a friend's office, and it was a ketamine and TMS therapy center. So it was work that I felt I could do, but I was in an office. So there, spoiler alert, you walk around the world, you've left that world behind, but then you're broke and you say, okay, I got to make money. I've got to figure some things out, take care of myself. And I really did struggle. You probably hear this often, don't you, from other people? They go off on walks, even just for a couple months. They come back and it's hard to adjust back to that life.
Yeah. It's hard to come back from a 2-week vacation, let alone 6.5 years.
Yeah, exactly. So felt like I gave it a good go. I even bought a car so I could get around. I could go to work. I could do that. And then I said, I think I need to connect again. I need to go out for a walk. And that's when I went and did Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan.
Yeah. So Angela, what's next for you?
Well, because I'm an extremist, I'm joining my friend Carl, where we are attempting to swim across the Caspian Sea. So we'll be going east to west. So that is Kazakhstan to Azerbaijan. It's going to take about 30 days, swimming about 6 hours a day. So just to note, my first failing grade was in physical education. I don't do many sports. I have not a competitive bone in my body. But as part of my friend Carl's walk, he he's doing one of those adventures where it has to be powered just by him,
Okay.
and so he's stuck in this location. And as a joke, I said, well, why don't we swim across the Caspian? Realizing there's no other option, we decided, okay, we're going to swim across the Caspian. Neither of us are swimmers, but now we're in training and getting a boat support. So hopefully in August of this year, I will successfully swim across the Caspian. Fingers crossed, everybody.
That's amazing. That's going to be another conversation for us to have. Angela, how can people find out more about you, kind of follow what you're doing, and even help with the work that you're doing?
That's great. The best, I think, really is just my website, shewalkstheearth.com. As we said, like, I'm not really big on social media, but I'm sometimes on Instagram. You can reach me there, but also on my website. The email goes right to me. There's no team. It's just reaching out. So if anyone has questions or just wants to send a little message, they can do it through the website.
So I'm curious, for people that are listening that are inspired by you, and I know that that's going to be many, and it already is many, people that have felt that call to adventure, but often, are concerned about the danger that lurks out there. What advice do you have for those people?
I would say first off is the reality is that there's always danger somewhere. If you can mentally get past the fact that just by going walking in the woods versus going walking in your park or something is going to be drastically different in danger, know that it's always there. And I think it's important to say, because it's not just get out there and just, suck it up and try,
Yeah.
I want people to know, as a woman in general, we are more at risk, or we could say more physically vulnerable. However, you can learn things. Look, I generally, when the attack happened in Mongolia, I didn't have a thing. I had a hammer. I didn't have pepper spray. I didn't have those things, a taser. It wasn't in my sphere of awareness. So what I say is, like, know that anywhere you are, if you can build your confidence to have a plan to do something in worst case scenarios, then that everything else around that, where you want to go, what part of the world you want to see, who you want to go visit and experience, that all starts to open in your vision. You literally have the whole world to you when you realize it's okay. I can just have a plan, of if something were to go wrong, I have this plan, and then I can go and do what I want. And so it's really about building that trust with ourselves in where we're called to go. And that's the other aspect too, is whatever it is, I hope it's just a little bit crazy. I hope it's just a little bit wild. I hope it's just a little bit enough for your mom or your sister or your daughter or your friend to say, really? Like, that's what you want to do? I promise you that is the sign for you to go do it. So there's so much out there for everyone if they listen to that calling, which it will be different for everyone. What does it mean to feel called? You'll know, because you're excited and you're terrified. That's how you
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that happened to you, and then Mom decided to come along for the journey
There you go.
afterwards.
No joke. The day I told my mom that I was going to walk around the world, she did like any decent mother. She was like on her knees begging me not to go. It was the worst possible idea. And then she became my greatest fan. She couldn't go to the barbershop without talking about it. And next thing we know, she has traveled Scotland and England, parts of France with me, and even almost all the way across the States. So you never know.
So Angela, your story is epic, and Hollywood's going to pick up on it at some point. And Hollywood's going to want to make a movie about you. And I want to know, when they do, who's going to be the Hollywood actress that's going to play you in your movie?
Right. Well, I once had my friend Pema say to me, if Hollywood ever makes a movie about your life, she thinks that Saoirse Ronan should play me.
Nice.
Yeah. So I'm just
Right.
going to stick with what she said because I couldn't possibly come up with someone.
Okay, very good. And what is your movie going to be called?
I think I'd probably just go with what I would think a book would be called or anything, which is just She Walks the Earth.
She Walks the Earth. I love this so much. Thank you so much for what you've done to inspire the world to listen to the voice inside us that calls to adventure. You have done that so beautifully. I really, really appreciate the time that you've spent with us today. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Angela's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Angela, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you to the listeners.